Welcome, everybody, to episode 11, I think, of the Scholar Gypsies. Today's guest is Thomas Sheridan. Some of you may remember that Thomas was my first ever guest in this series of interviews. And I've asked Thomas to join me today for a very specific reason. And that reason is tied into something I've noticed developing in many of the Telegram groups, social media accounts, and even in some events or even protests that people are organizing around the country. And it's this mud that seems to get flung quite a lot about people being Freemasons or groups being Freemasons or controlled opposition and stuff like that. I suppose the Freemasons one is interesting in the sense that it has such a historic record in not just Ireland but around the world. So I wanted to get Thomas in because he's very, very well versed in Freemasons, the history of the Freemasons, and has produced a load of content on his YouTube channel about it. So I wanted to get Thomas in as an kind of education on the history of Freemasonry in Ireland, and to bring it right up to contemporary times and ask the question, is this something that, you know, we should be worrying ourselves about? I also wanted to get into it with Thomas about, you know, darker forces, and I've alluded to it a number of times, that sometimes you do go down tracks, or specifically when you start looking into certain things or certain people, you do get a sense there's a darker force at play in some areas, and I wanted to get his take on that, or even if he's found it through the course of his work, which, you know, many would find highly, you know, certainly controversial, some of it. But anyway, for those that are not aware, Thomas Sheridan is a published author, and I'll just go through some of his titles. Since 2011, they include Puzzling People, The Druid Code, Walpurgis Night, and there are others too. You can support Thomas on his YouTube channels, Room 313, Thomas Sheridan, and Thomas Sheridan 2. And I will have links to all Thomas's work in the description of this video. And I'd invite people to support Thomas where they can, because he genuinely is I think, one of the best content producers, intellectual content producers in the country. So the other thing is, if you want to support what I'm trying to do here on Scholar Gypsies, or with my writing on the West's Awake on Substack, there will be links in the description and in the pinned comment below. So if you can support what we're trying to do here, that'd be great. And also if you can like, share, subscribe, all that jazz too. So without blathering on too much longer, I'm going to jump into my conversation with Thomas now and find out basically when exactly, or can we time when Freemasonry first raised its head in Ireland?
Well, it's, you know, it's like saying, when did religion come to Ireland? You know, there's an official kind of thing with St. Well, Christianity. There's an official kind of thing with St. Patrick. And when you start looking at it, there were Roman Christians who had arrived long before him, and hermits and things like that. And there was no real, then it was for years after he was allegedly here, there was still vast amounts of pagans for hundreds of years, and the odd Christian here and there. So it's very difficult to pin down an actual date proper. Okay. But you really got to look at the history of Masonry as a whole. Masons have, first of all, you have to talk about what it is really. Masonry grew up in the Middle Ages as basically a revolt to the power of the Vatican. That was its primary thing. These were actually Freemasons that worked in building the great Gothic cathedrals and so on. Now, these guys believed they had a lineage that went all the way back to Atlantis, Masons are very much in the whole belief of the civilization before civilization. This is one of the reasons they've fallen on the wrong side of the churches, because they don't believe in the biblical timeline as such. They believe that there was, humans on this earth civilized that went back to like an Atlantis type, or they actually called it Atlantis. And some of their dating is spectacularly ancient, like up to 100,000 years. And then other are more in the sort of the Plato end of things, which is like 11,900 years ago. But they'd all kind of agree that something that approximated the craft that was formalized as masonry in the Middle Ages went back to the ancient world, via Egypt and so on. This is why they have Mithric lodges and Mithric schools of the Persian god Mithra. They have the Cretan school of the Greek islands. They have the Greek school. They have the Jewish school. They have the Egyptian school. They're all beliefs in this ancient antiquarian thing that came from a previous civilization that they, to use one of their own terms, gathered up that which was broken and scattered and reassembled it into something new. Now, the Masons existed as a kind of an underground alternative to the power of the church. They weren't particularly satisfied with Christianity. They knew there was a bigger story there, which of course there was, that the Christians had and the churches had destroyed much of the history of the ancient world, or was stored away in the Vatican Library. And they sort of like, in a way, tried to rebuild the Library of Alexandria in their own kind of lodges. Now, then the Crusades came along, and there was a group called the Knights Templars, or the Templars. They were a knightly order who were charged with protecting pilgrimages to the Middle East, to the Holy Land, as they called it. These guys, something happened in Jerusalem that gave these guys a phenomenal amount of wealth and power. But not only that, they started to take an interest in non-Christian religions, things like Hinduism and Zoroastrianism, Hermeticism, and the different religions in the Middle East. And they became very, very wealthy, to the point where the Vatican and the King of France, who was the most powerful king in Europe at the time, were worried that they were building a nation. Not only did they have their own army and this phenomenal wealth, they had their own banking system, and they were building hospitals on the islands in the Mediterranean. You were just becoming like a country without an actual flag or anything like this. So King Philip in France got together with the Vatican and outlawed them all and had them all arrested in one day and tortured and executed most of them. And that was on a Friday the 13th, sometime in the 1300s. And that's how the date Friday the 13th became synonymous with bad luck, because if you were a Mason, you had bad luck that day. Or sorry,
right. Never knew that.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. So where they broke up and fled, they made their way eventually to Scotland by way of Ireland, funny enough. And they established basically Scotland as a Templar Masonic nation. That's why you have the Sinclairs and all this kind of thing up in Scotland, Roslin and all these other places. But they stayed some time in Ireland, particularly in Sligo and Donegal. Anywhere in Ireland named with the term temple, Temple House, Temple Oak, Temple Moor, funny enough, the head of the Garda, which is a weird one, and Temple Bar were all founded by Templars. So like Temple Bar in Dublin was the sandbar and the Liffey, where the Templars owned to bring their ships in. So there was, the European powers are very unhappy about this, and there was like stories of, well, they're not stories, actual facts of, the Pope writing letters to Irish bishops saying, I'm hearing stories of Templars walking around in non-secular robes in places like Kilkenny. What are you going to do about it? So they enjoyed an element of autonomy here, and some obviously did stay. And there's still quite a lot of Templar, should we say, leftover things in Waterford, Kilkenny, and down around East Cork. Now, to the Irish thing. The first lodges appeared in Ireland in about early 1700s in East Cork. Youghal was the first officially recognized lodge in the country. And this is right in the heart of Templar country as well. So, it obviously shows the lineage did also succeed in Ireland. But there are Templar symbolisms like the compass and square on the eye all over Ireland that seem to be much older a lot of them are on old bridges, and again the masonry thing and so on, and they're all over the place, and some of them go back really, really old, like the before like Henry VIII's plantation, dissolution of the monasteries and the opening of the church of the Anglican Church. So they've always been in Ireland. They've always been underground, and the first lodges appeared in Ireland around 1700-ish, early in Youghal and in Cork. But the first big one, which had happened in the 1720s, was the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which was incorporated up in Dublin and is still there to this day on Molesworth Street. The father of Irish proper masonry is a guy called Dr. Chetwold Crawley, and he was basically the one who not only archived the entire history of Irish masonry, but played a huge part in consolidating it into a formal organization in Ireland. And in fact, the Irish Freemason, the Grand Lodge of Ireland, is one of the most powerful lodges in the world still to this day in terms of its influence, even though it uses the York Rite, which is a school of masonry that began in York in England, obviously. And so that's basically it. That's the history of how it came to Ireland.
Well, just before...
it flourished within British military. So by the time these garrison towns you have around Ireland, a lot of them had, like in Sligo at one time, there were 17 Freemasonic lodges, mostly connected to the British military, but still 5, by the way, in Sligo town. So it was a big thing within the British military among officers and things like even staff sergeants. It wasn't just only an aristocratic thing. So it became basically entrenched in Ireland through the British system, basically. Especially following the sort of what they call the Glorious Revolution, which is basically the Dutch conquest of England and Ireland under King William.
Okay. Now you've raised a few things I want to talk about there, Thomas. I suppose one of the first ones. What is it that gives you described the Grand Lodge in Dublin on Molesworth Street? I think you said there. What gives it such power?
The people who join it. And the day it doesn't have the power it once did. At the time, say when the British Empire was quite strongly influential in the country in terms of administrative things, it had enormous power through the state. For instance, there used to be an oath that all Irish civil servants used to have to swear, and it said, "I hereby swear I am not a member of any Freemasonic lodge or organization apart from the Grand Lodge of Ireland." In fact, there were Sinn Féin delegates bringing this thing up in what you call it, the British Parliament in the late early 19th century. Any kind of Irish MPs saying, and not just Republicans, but also even some Unionists, saying that the Templars may be, the Masons may be a charitable organization for gentlemen in England, but they said in Ireland it has a nefarious impact upon the actual structure of the state and the running of the country. And both sides said that for different reasons. So Masonry in Ireland, especially as we approached independence, say it's an Athenian years on, seems to have entrenched itself very deeply within the state, which would have been like the Ireland part of the UK, of the Union.
So Thomas, you brought up briefly there the Masons are organized into lodges and things like that. Are they, as we, the only comparable kind of organization would be in my head would be the Orange Order in the north, as we know those lodges. Are they connected? Are they Mason lodges, or are they something entirely different?
Well, they're Masonic in the sense that they're fraternities and brotherhoods, but the Grand Lodge of Ireland wants nothing to do with the Orange Order. In fact, they consider them bigots and an extremely disruptive force. The Grand Lodge of Ireland, now they've never officially mentioned it, but I mean, I know a couple of Masons, and I've been asked to join 2 lodges in the east of Ireland. I wouldn't do it because it's not my style. But I was talking to the Masons about it, and they said that they're absolutely disgraceful. They consider the Orange Order to be a disgraceful organization that has blackened the name of brotherhoods and fraternities.
Well, I often one of the criticisms I've seen it in various groups that I've been in is accusations of different Irish kind of organizations that may or may not have been, I suppose the term is used, infiltrated, but when the way you've described Freemasonry there is not necessarily in a kind of nefarious sense, was there some sort of is an understanding of what's going on here a lot more nuanced?
Well, it's obviously it's always based on a history of the times. Now, since the foundation of the state, I have found no evidence that Freemasonry is involved in any kind of nefarious carry-ons with this country in terms of influencing public policy. And that's not to say there aren't politicians and there aren't like high-ranking civil servants and people in the army and so on who are not Masons. They probably are, many of them, or some of them anyway. But I found no evidence of that. They seem to have completely removed the political element out of the structure in Ireland during the Civil War. In fact, even during the Civil War, the anti-treaty forces held the Molesworth Lodge as a sniper position on Leinster House. So they kind of made a kind of a default, from what I can gather. The thing was, we'll just purely stick with Masonry as a brotherhood for connections, for raising money for charity and so on. And I have not seen any evidence that they're anything other than that. Now, before independence, absolutely, there seemed to have been entrenched in the British state. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of the RIC constabulary, as well as officers in the British Army in Ireland, particularly in the Irish regiments, like the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, the Connacht Rangers, and all these ones, they were all heavily involved in Masonry as a kind of a hobby. So it kind of was defaulting that way. So, but when the British left Ireland, and the British military left Ireland in particular, and the dissolution of the RIC, it lost a lot of its power. That's why the likes of Collins and the founders, fathers of the state, really didn't have a problem with them, because it ceased to have a real power in the country following, the treaty.
Okay, fair enough. And as I just want to take it back to the Knights Templar. The way you described it there I got a sense that I've often heard of people talk about a kind of infiltration of the Freemasons. You hear all this Illuminati stuff.
Oh, that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah. In Adam Weishaupt, there's a group called the Bavarian Illuminati, who were very much, this is why I'm always telling people to watch Germany. Pay close fucking attention to Germany. There's a reason why Klaus Schwab and all these other Germans and people like all these German pharmaceutical companies are so heavily in the WEF and so on. These are Prussian Hessian aristocrats. Now, in Frankfurt, which is in Hesse, basically several banking families, including not only the Rothschilds but others that were not Rothschilds, got together and decided that the best model forward for Europe in terms of their own business was republics, the republic system of government, to replace the monarchies, basically. So their objective was to take all the monarchies around Europe and replace the kings and queens to just figureheads. A lot of this had come out of fallout regarding the English Civil War and Cromwell and the Dutch bankers and all this kind of thing. But they basically said republics is the way to go. It's the best money system for us and for trading and this kind of thing. And so this guy Weishaupt, which is a Jesuit, he was sent to infiltrate lodges, and he was extremely successful. It wasn't just him, he had a whole operative team. But the main place they infiltrated was the Grand Orient in Paris. And in Lewis Spence's book on the history of Freemasonry, this is considered a catastrophe for what's called the authentic school, meaning Masons who don't get involved in politics, that are just there for the benefit of spiritual development or social development. And they turned them into, and by the time they figured out that these guys from the Bavarian Illuminati had infiltrated the Grand Orient in Paris, Lewis Spence's own words was the damage was done, and it had been spread to the Vienna Lodge. It had spread throughout the Swedish Rite, which is the most common form of masonry in Central Europe. And next thing you know, you have the French Republic, the French and the Bourbons fall. So that was what happened there. That's absolutely a true story. That's not like a conspiracy theory or anything, and it's considered by many Masons to have been a catastrophe for the organization, because it diverted them from. You know, a lot of it was about spiritual development and stuff like that, and also the Masonic lodge were filled with the best men of their day, like Mozart in the Vienna Lodge, and there's letters to the other composer Linz saying things like, I've no fear of death anymore. I've discovered that you don't die, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and so on. So and this was all based on a kind of a pseudo mystical, occultic kind of convention they had going on, and suddenly Masons are now politicized through the Grand Orient and the Bavarian Illuminati. So it wasn't that the Masons were infiltrating anyone else. It was just that they were a very powerful mechanism of social influence, and the Bavarian Illuminati infiltrated them. It'd be like in Ireland, if you wanted to take over Ireland, who would you hit? The GAA.
Yes, 100%. Yeah,
so that's what the Masonic lodges around the Grand Orient and so on around Europe were like. It's who you get to get what you want.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I suppose you've brought me, you triggered something there in my else in my head, because this thing about you at the very beginning of the conversation there, you mentioned about how the original Masons were, they wanted to be apart from the power of the Catholic Church or Christianity, and they looked back to a period of time, going back to 11,900 and 100,000 years ago. I was watching a video you were doing there recently on Matthew Hancock and Ancient Apocalypse.
Graham Hancock.
Or Graham Hancock. And the time frames he was speaking about seems to line up nicely, that there's this forgotten civilization. And just from what you were saying there, that the Masons seem to have the same idea at their outset anyway.
Oh, absolutely. They were very suspicious of the Vatican's control of the knowledge. A lot of this had to do with the Vatican Library. These were men who were engineers and scientists in the Middle Ages. They built the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe, and they were looking at the ancient world and what the Romans and the Greeks had built. They saw the Parthenon, the largest concrete dome I think it's still the largest concrete dome ever cast to this day. And the aqueduct systems around Rome and all the other things you see in the ancient world in Egypt. And they said, look, the story's missing. There's something not right here. There's no way that these people, like Origen of Alexandria, who was basically the one who really can create the Bible. He basically assembled the Bible as you know it today. And he had basically described every ancient rite in the classical world as being depraved and perverted. So basically, like he said, they were all bacchanalias, that they were all like festivals of alcoholism and rampant sexuality and stuff. The Masons started to gather up documents. They got this whole thing. This is their thing: gather up that which is scattered to assemble it to what it truly should be. And so they started to gather up, doing their own antiquarian work. And this is probably what happened under the temple in Jerusalem when the Templars got there. They probably found all these documents that the Vatican hadn't got their hands on and destroyed or locked up or burned or whatever, and then suddenly came back and says, there's a whole other story to humanity. That Pope in Rome is not telling us the truth, and this is the wonderful side of the Freemasons that people not generally know about. And then we've discovered things like the rites of Elysium that was portrayed by the church as being a depraved festival of carnal knowledge and drunkenness, turned out to be actually a family festival of bonding and a kind of like an Easter type thing. And yeah, this was the church. They saved so much of the classical world. That's why they had their own archaeological crews. You can see this in places like Egypt. The French Masons got to Egypt before anyone in terms of archaeology. And they were the real, the Rosetta Stone and all this. These are the real ones who we know so much about Egyptology from French Masonic architects. If the Vatican made sure when places like the the amazing underground structures of Malta were discovered, they sent in only Jesuit architects. Everything had to fit into their story. So, you know, they were a tremendous asset to any of us who are interested in the ancient world, because they saved a lot of history that the bishops and the popes would have been perfectly happy to either be burnt up in the Library of Alexandria or like vanished in the Vatican's archives forever.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the spiritual nature, if any of them, were they more towards a paganist kind of a belief system, or was that part of what was their makeup there in terms of we'll say, set in contrast to what the Catholic Church were?
Well, they committed the worst crime of all as far as the Catholic Church was concerned, in that they didn't care what religion people were. They didn't have, you could be any religion and join the Masons. You could be, you know, anything really. And they didn't care. That's why you have Muslim members and Jewish members and Christian members and even Hindu members and everything. However, they do have a fundamental kind of spiritual story. And it's kind of complicated. It's not super complicated, but it's very interesting. They have this belief in something called the Great Architect, which is basically some god that built the universe. And that's what the compass and square represents in the symbol. The compass and square represents the great god of the architect, the great architect of the universe. This unknown being, force, intelligence, whatever, which they don't name because they believe it's beyond man's comprehension, that created the universe that we live in. They don't believe that it's been an accident, as they believe there's an actual creative force behind it. And this is why Masons have been very heavily involved in things like, you know, sponsoring the arts, you know, and this kind of thing, because they're great believers in creativity. And so that was the god of the universe, but the human race was the world was a different place. Now, this isn't common. This is, you know, people talk about secrets of the Freemasons, right? I'll give you one right now. They believe there's a god, the great architect of the universe, which is the god that built everything in creation, right? From the atom up to up the spiral galaxies and everything in between. But there's also a god of this world, okay? And he's generally referred to as the king of the world, okay? The king of the world, and he's a unique god just for this planet. Some lodges believe it's Apollo, the Greek god Apollo, but many of the lodges believe it's Lucifer. Now, and that's what the eye is inside the compass and square. It's the eye of Lucifer. It's not the third eye. It's not the eye of Ra, anything like that. It's Lucifer. Now let's talk about Lucifer, because it's not this. They don't worship the devil. Okay, get that straight, right? They believe there was an Irish bishop, Bishop Ulster. He was actually the bishop of Armagh, but he was based in Dublin. And he dated the earth to 6,000 years old, and it became the year of enlightenment, the Anno Lucius, which means basically the moment man became able to think for himself. You know, before that, man was not able to think for himself, and suddenly he had awareness. He could begin to create cave art, build things, and all this kind of stuff. Now he dated it at that. But the Anno Lucius means the year of light. Freemasons believe that we're all possessing of something called the inner light. The inner light is your autonomy and your self identity as a person, your vital spark, your soul, basically. Now, the Latin word for light is Lucius, which is where Lucifer comes from. Now, Lucifer is not mentioned in the Bible. That's a mistake. It's only mentioned in the King James Bible, and there was a mistranslation of a Hebrew term. The Scottish clerks that were creating the King James Bible mistranslated a Hebrew term and said it was Lucifer. It wasn't. We don't know what it is, but it's definitely accepted that Lucifer appears nowhere in any Bible. But Lucifer was a pagan Roman god based on a Greek Roman god, like most of the Roman gods, called Phosphorus. And he represented the planet Venus and the morning star, and the rising of light after the dark night of the soul. So when Masons worship Lucifer, they're not worshiping some guy with horns in his head and all that stuff, or anything like that. They're worshiping the inner light that gives autonomy and creativity, and it gives enlightenment. So therefore, you have the great God of the architect, the architect of the universe, who's created the universe, and then you have the king of the world. The king of the world is Lucifer, and that's others will say, oh no, it's not, it's Apollo. And I say, okay, but isn't Apollo congruent with Lucifer? Well, yeah. Well, there you go. You just change his names because it doesn't have the same emotional impact. But for all intents and purposes, it's Lucifer. And apparently, when the Masons were being tortured by the Templars were being tortured during the reign of terror back in the 1300s, they referred to an entity called Baphomet. Baphomet was it's this horned god that has a human body. That was Pan, the Indo-European Pan. So yeah, they were definitely involved in a pagan thing big time. But what they do is not really spiritual or religious so much. It's basically, these are kind of like language and archetypes they use to term the mysterious. So the Luciferian light of the world. So Lucifer, if you look at the way they describe it, it's basically what the ancient Greeks and Romans described it as. The God who represents the moment of enlightenment, the moment when you wake up, the thing at the end of the dark night of soul. And it's only because some idiot mistranslated the Bible and stuck the word Lucifer in there that people think that has something to do with the devil. It doesn't. No, it's not in any. Lucifer's in none of the Hebrew text that the Bible is based on.
And that can't be some accident. Like I can, would say we accept the mistranslation, but in the Christian tradition, Lucifer has become this total opposite character, or fallen angel, or whatever you might want to say, pivotal to the whole of Christianity as the dark light, the darkness kind of figure.
Yeah, but look at it this way: the God of the Old Testament. If you sit down objectively and you read the Old Testament, right, the first 5 books of the Torah, and you will come to the same conclusion that the Neoplatonists came to, the Cathars came to, the Gnostics came to, and the Bogomils came to, that the God of the Old Testament is a psychopath. He murders people who don't obey him. He tells armies to go out to rape, murder, and slaughter. He kills children. He gives whole cities plagues if they don't do what he says. He murders babies. He's a monster. He's an absolute vicious, totalitarian psychopath. And this is why the groups like you have the Gnostics and the Demiurge and stuff, they believe that the God of the Old Testament is a demon called Jehovah that's pretending to be God and is lying through these books. And that's where the Gnostics came from. That still continues today, even in some Masonic circles. And Lucifer was seen as this angel who said, well, screw you. You're a psychopath, you're a bully, and you're a monster, which he was. I mean, evidently speaking, it's there in the Torah and in the Old Testament. And he led a revolt against the bully tyrant God. Now, this is what these mean. This is why Soloninsky devoted his book, Rules for Radicals, to the greatest rebel of them all, Lucifer, because it's true. He said, you're a tyrant and a bully. And that's where that all comes from. And that's why Christians were encouraged, mainly through Presbyterianism. You don't get the same obsession with Lucifer in Catholicism as you do in Catholicism. It's interesting. They seem to have more of it. They use the word the devil, which is actually what you should call it. The devil is a much better term. It just means of evil. That's all in French. But Lucifer is not a big deal in Catholicism. It's a big deal among Presbyterians. And I'm talking about like hardcore Presbyterians, and they were the ones who made Lucifer the devil. So it's the whole thing. It's like I was talking to someone the other day, and he said to me, "Well, I'm a Christian. I believe that Christianity." And I says, "Okay, why are you a Christian?" "Oh, it's because it works for me." And I said, "Fair enough, no problem." And I said, "If you were born in the Middle East, say born in Oman, or you were born in a Shinto village in China, or you were born in Kerala in India, whereas everyone's Hindu, would you still be a Christian? And it's, see, a lot of this stuff is cultural things we pick up. And this is a part of enlightenment as well, is to better yourself. It's like what they said, that this is a very big thing among all masonry, is the whole concept of the temple of Delphi, and the concept of know thyself, understand thyself. And you say this is what the Luciferian thing is. Am I a Christian because I actually really believe this, or am I a Christian because my parents were? And why do I continue it? Do I really do believe it? Fair enough, but I don't really believe it, so maybe it's not for me. And that's where that all came from.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. So, Thomas, where do where, in a sense, does Masonry kind of veer off in towards a more darker place? I know there's different levels within, we'll say, the structures of it, but I still get the sense that it is a powerful force, if not in Ireland, in the world.
Yeah, espionage. Now, no, it's a very powerful force, but it's not as maybe in some countries it is. You'd be surprised about some of them too, like in African countries and things like that. In Ireland, no, it's definitely benign. It's lost its power, from what I know. But countries that have big military traditions, that's when it can get a bit worrying. So, for instance, in the U.S. Navy, the Scottish Rite is huge. You know, you basically can't get to command a battleship or any kind of cruiser or anything in the U.S. Navy if you're not in the Scottish Rite. Now, okay, and you say, so okay, it's just a fraternity, blah, blah, blah. But what if the head of some weapons manufacturer is also in the Scottish Rite? And he's in the same lodge as you, and he says, so you guys need a new missile system for your ships? And then you get the funny handshakes. The next thing you know, he's buying off his buddy. In fact, I think Halliburton and George Bush might have been connected. Cheney, Cheney and Halliburton. He may have had that no bid contract with George Bush through some Masonic group. Now we know that the Bushes are involved in a very nefarious lodge, which is outside standard masonry, called Skull and Bones. They're based at Yale. These are really nasty bunches of people. These are like, see, this when you get into some of the universities and the Ivy League schools and places like Cambridge and Oxford, these are, in many ways, the Masonic groups in there can be very dodgy, very iffy, and very powerful. And this is so. I remember what was all going down with Halliburton and Dick Cheney, and his relationship with George Bush Jr. And when the no bid contract, that's a classic kind of Mason thing. My taking care of your buddies, that has secret handshakes and all that stuff. So that's when it's nefarious, when it's outside the rules of regular, just business or anything like that. So military. So in the U.S. military, particularly the Navy, Masonry is big. It's also big in things like NASA. Well, it was. It's not really now. The NASA has changed because NASA, in the Apollo days, those astronauts, a lot of technicians were also ex-Navy. So again, Scottish Rite. This is why Buzz Aldrin put the Scottish Rite flag on banner on the moon before he erected the American flag. This is a lot of this kind of thing. So yeah, again, can you get a contract in NASA back in the Apollo days saying, I make a booster that would probably be really good on something like some fuel system, injection system that's on the Scottish Rite, that's on the Saturn V rocket, and then someone comes and go, I remember the lodge, and you go, no. I tell you what, go to the lodge, go through a couple of degrees, and then come to me. So that's when it gets, and you'll have that in espionage and all kinds of nasty business. Yeah.
And so like you're kind of hinting there at kind of the old academic structures there seem to be
the old boys network. That's where that comes from. And that's where, when you say he's a square guy, that's another one. The black and white squares on the floor. When they say so, he's a square guy, means he's in the lodge, and we fixed it all up, and it's a square deal. That's lodge talk, and that kind of thing, And the university's hats that originally came in the Ivy League schools, they're a board. It's a mortar board, and that's to represent Masons as well. Now that's gone into all universities now, but that's originally what that was. And then things like the 4 square sides, that was a big thing. It's called Pythagoreanism. It's like its own mystical thing based on the Pythagorean mysteries. And 4 square meals a day in the army. Now, I'll tell you where Masonry came to a very sinister thing is in Ireland. In 1798, when you had the United Irishmen's uprising. Now, the United Irishmen's were a kind of they were not an officially sanctioned Masonic group, but everything back then was about brotherhoods. So, even though it was very, you and I could start a brotherhood tomorrow. You know what I mean? We could just call ourselves, blah, 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 or, the StreamYard fraternity, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're in with the big crowd, but we have our own little gang, right? Now, the United Irishmen were like that. Now, in 1798, it's an interesting story. Daniel O'Connell was actually the Grand Master of the Irish Lodge in Molesworth Street when 1798 was going on. And James Connolly has even written about this as who was Daniel O'Connell. Have you seen his monument on O'Connell Street in Dublin? It's pure Masonic. It's all there. It's a Masonic temple, his monument on O'Connell Street. And it shows how he's standing there with the classic Republican, the hand in the air like this. That's a Masonic thing that used to be, Napoleon did that. And also Charles Stewart Parnell, the other end of the street, he's actually all Masonic stuff around him as well. But he did nothing in 1798. And even James Connolly wrote essays about it. It's like, who was Daniel O'Connell, the great emancipator? Now, when he died, he said, "My heart to Rome, my body to Ireland." Now, what he said, he didn't care about Ireland. His heart was Rome, and this guy was probably the great emancipator, not because he loved Catholics and poor Catholics. It's because the same reason the Duke of Wellington did it in England is because it was more votes for the political party. It was very similar to gerrymandering that went on in America. Not gerrymandering, Tammany Hall. Now, regarding 1798 uprising, the French troops that landed in Killala up the road here and tried to land at Bantry were led by Freemasonic officers who had come to the country to aid the United Irishmen. There was some successful battles up in Castlebar and in Sligo and a few other places, and they were eventually defeated in Ballinamuck, I think it was, in Roscommon, and also down in Wexford. There was, Vinegar Hill and stuff like that. Now, the United Irishmen were a very successful force. They were actually came close to winning nearly. They were very well organized. Unfortunately, there was a lot of sectarian reprisals. So particularly in places like Wicklow and Wexford and Kilkenny and Carlow, where United Irishmen Catholics decided it was time to they massacred large numbers of innocent Protestants. And it is one of the shameful things in this country's history we never talk about. But when the battles ended, the French troops dined. The battle was over, and the French troops met the British. Well, the Irish were immediately seized and executed. Often they were hung by what they called the human gallows. Fellows who were really tall, usually Scotsmen, who had a rope around the noose, and they would hang them. Okay, and the British dined that evening with the French, who were supposedly the allies of the Irish, in a Freemasonic grand banquet, while outside there was the piles of Irish prisoners were racking up. And that's dark. That's dark. Because even though one was for the French Republic and the other one was for the British Empire, when the battle was over, the grand hailing of distress, the two hands in the air like this, and that meant he was a lodge brother, the secret handshake, and then drinks in the officer's tent.
So that's almost like there's a higher loyalty than even.
Oh yeah, if you're a member, if you're a 33rd degree Mason, your country is everything. Even God is secondary. That's why Daniel O'Connell sits above all on that monument in Dublin. All the trappings of state are below him. The bureaucrats, the bishops, they're all below him. Oh, absolutely. If you reach the 33rd degree, especially if you become a Grand Master, and you are basically that's what it is. You first kill off your relationship with your father, and you become the widow's son. That's what they first call themselves, the widow's son. That means that you've killed your relationship, symbolically, you've killed your relationship with your father, and therefore you're the widow's son. You've no father, you've only a mother. Your father is gone, your brothers are gone. The lodge is your new male patriarchal go-to thing, okay? Now, when they reach the 33rd degree, in some lodges, particularly like in the Scottish Rite lodges, you then become a thing called the mother's son, which I don't know what that's about, but they call themselves a mother's son at that level. And that's when you seem to have unbelievable power. You'll see the judiciary is full of judges at that level. You had Roberto Calvi, who was found hanging on the Great Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1981, who was the head of the Vatican Bank. He was a 33rd degree Mason, and he tried to get help, but just before he was found suicided, he tried to get help from the Masonic Lodge in the city of London, and he was there doing the grand hailing of the stress, and they closed the door on him. And so, you know, there's even rivalries because that was all propaganda Dewey. It was a very different lodge. And so, and you want to talk about a lodge that had unbelievable nefarious power. It was the propaganda Dewey in Italy. They basically ran Italy entirely until about the late 1970s, early 1980s, when they were busted. But they were more powerful than anyone. Italy was the nation of Italy was basically a side project for propaganda Dewey.
Okay. And are they? Would you get the sense that they're still particularly strong in areas of finance and stuff like that, politics, globally? No,
I don't think so. No, I think the power would be probably in things. No, I don't. They're just. You see, the thing is, what it all started to die in the late Victorian. The power started to wane in the late Victorian era because before mass media, newspapers, and things like that, the main place to network was in the lodges. When the power of the media, Hollywood movies, television came along, you didn't need that anymore. You didn't need to be a member of any lodge. And so that's when it started to wane in terms of its influence. Now, I don't know, there could be other places, like I said, the US military, that's one place that still remains strong, the Navy. But in general, I don't think they have any great power. I think things like the bureaucratic world has superseded them. Things like the EU even, you'll have much more power being an EU commissioner than you'd ever have being the Grand Master of the entire Scottish Rite for the world. You know what I mean? So those kinds of ambitious types cutthroats, we might call them, they end up in the European Commission or they end up in the World Economic Forum and so on. The power isn't there within Masonry anymore.
Okay. And what's the attraction to people that join the lodges nowadays? Because you do see, you can. I know I did. I went on a dive into just some of the lodges that are in Ireland, and they publish everybody that's in them, and it seems almost like a kind of business/charity thing in a lot
exactly
of ways.
It is. And it's also a way for men to actually, it's probably one of the few places today where men can gather and be men among themselves, whatever, the kind of thing, like an old gentleman's club, and do it in a kind of a formal sense. There's tremendous learning in it. There's tremendous, they all have phenomenal libraries. I was in the one in Stavanger in Norway, and they all have incredible libraries. And a lot of people who, there's people who join to network, and that kind of thing. There's people who join because they like the social aspects, but it's absolutely true they raise colossal amounts of money for charity here, especially and things like that, huge amounts of money. And so they do a lot of good. There's no doubt about that, particularly in help. I mean, you hear stories of people. I mean, I heard a story of one guy. He was 15, and this is in Wicklow, and both his parents died of cancer within a year of each other. And there's a 15-year-old kid left alone. The local Masons bought him an apartment, set up and paid for his education, and looked after him until he was able to go out and work for himself. These are the kind of things they do, and you don't ever hear about it, there's a lot of goodness that's put. This is the whole thing. They want to do good work for mankind. Now, you could twist that and say, like, well, starting a war might be a good work or something like that. But in general, that's what they're for. But there's other ones who do it for spiritual development, who want to get outside the whole Christian thing, and they want to learn about the classical world, and they want to learn about ancient rites and Egyptology, and they want to learn a different way of living. And they developed all this through the initiative steps all the way up to the 33rd degree. And so there's a great intellectual what's the word, fulfillment in it, in that way. You know, and if you're an intellectual type person and you like reading books and you're interested in ancient history, it opens up enormous doors for you. You know, the kind of thing, because you can put you, say, if like you're interested in Egyptology, well, there'll be someone in the lodge who can set you up with someone in the museum in Cairo and get you into the pyramids where no one, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a great fulfillment for people in that way. In fact, it's probably the most attractive thing, because the libraries are, I mean, the library and the one on Molesworth Street, unbelievable, you know, like, and that would be reflected in even smaller lodges, even like ones around the country in Sligo and Baltinglass and down in Cork. Absolutely. And so there's a big element of that to it, a big element of developing as a person, and the rituals and the rites have a kind of a militaristic kind of hierarchy to them, and a lot of fellas do enjoy that. You know, I don't know if you're ever in the Boy Scouts, but you remember when I was a Boy Scout, I went from being an assistant patrol leader to a patrol leader, and you know, getting your proficiency badge before you. To me, that they were all based on, that was all, the Boy Scouts are all based on Masonic type grades. I found that tremendously satisfying. That you know, if you learned you got so many proficiency badges, then you could get your, you know, your assistant patrol leader and patrol leader. To me, as a kid, that was, you know, so, but to have that your whole life for some people would be a beautiful thing, you know, because they're always learning, they're always intellectualizing, they're learning and reading, they're involving themselves with people that they can have really intellectual discussions with, and so on. So that's the great appeal of it. The downside of it is it's not considered trendy anymore, and it attracts a lot of kind of geeky guys who are trying to say, you know, like, you know, fellas, geeky guys in business who go like, I have a carpet showroom, maybe I can get like the contract with a lot of hotels or something. Like that. You get a lot of that kind of thing, and it does work for them sometimes. But a lot of it today would be just like nerdy guys, one hand, who are just like looking for something to bond with, and then the other side, now I'm talking about Ireland now, would be, you know, fellas genuinely interested in developing themselves as men, and all that, going home and saying, we raise so much money for a spina bifida center in Carlow or somewhere. So that's the appeal of it.
And it's a mail order, is it, Thomas? Like, are there female Masons?
Yeah, there's it never took off though. There was a big effort in England in the late Victorian era to create coal masonry, which would be, you know, for females. It just never took off. And you had like one called the Eastern Star, the Eastern Gate, two of them actually in America, and I think Michelle Obama might be a member of one of them. It's like the Women's Institute. It's very much a boys' club, and women were just not interested in Freemasonry. It didn't interest them. Because it's a kind of, the kind of things they do are more geeky, and they generally appeal to men. You know, like the studying, and I'm not saying women don't study, but you know what I'm saying, that women don't, the same reason women don't necessarily have an obsession with joining the military and going through the grades. It seems to be a man kind of thing. Men are much more interested in sort of like moving through degrees and grades. So it never really took off. It never got to any great power.
Okay. And would you raise any significance? You know, you mentioned Templemore there. Would there be any significance that Templemore is the home to our Guard Síochána, where we train all our Guard Síochána? Would you read into something like that, or would you not? No,
I haven't read into that one, but I'm not sure. Maybe some of your readers, you can look up yourself now. Was Templemore a centre of the RIC? Well, then we can read into it. If it was the Garda that started up there, well, probably not. But I mean, when I went through the list of places in Ireland that were associated with Templar colleges, and when I saw Templemore, I just burst out laughing. And I said, "Would it be? Wouldn't that if that's the reason why the Garda are there? If the Garda took over that place and no one was there before them, then it wasn't. But if the RIC had that as a big base, then it was."
Yeah, right. Fair enough. Fair enough. I suppose I want to slide. You know, there's a lot of the symbology of the order, like even as recently as last week, when you know Varadkar was getting a seal of office in the from the president, and there was the black and white tiles, and they had the set piece photograph, and all of that stuff. Are a lot of our buildings in Dublin kind of having that link?
Dublin is one of the most Freemasonic built cities in the world in terms of architecture. It's all over the place. Basically, the buildings that were built during the British reign and also under the old Kingdom of Ireland, I'm talking about like Grattan's Parliament, are Freemasonic temples. Particular ones that stand out would be the Customs House. The Customs House is basically a pagan temple. It's surrounded by bucraniums, which is in the interior section, and there's 33 measurements all over it, which is one of like the calling cards, black and white squares, swastikas everywhere, 5-pointed stars. That's a big one. That's a really big one. But they're everywhere. You see fascia. There's fascia all along. You know, the bunch of sticks with the axe head sticking out. There's the symbol of the power of ancient Rome. They're all over O'Connell Street. They're even holding up the table on Charles Stewart Parnell's monument in at the top of O'Connell Street, at the Parnell Square end of O'Connell Street. Yeah, I mean Dublin is full of it, and there's every city has a magical gateway. In London, it's Charing Cross. Charing Cross Station is considered the mystical gateway to London, and there's a series of columns that run from outside the Charing Cross Station all the way up into the Midlands somewhere. And it's considered that if you have every city has to be entered through a mystical gate. There's a mystical entrance. It's College Green in Dublin, and that's why the statue of King Billy was at the end of it. That's why Grattan's Parliament was built on one side. You have the ceremonial entrance through the old city gate up where Christchurch was, through the old Viking city and into the start of the city. At the end of that was the Apollo Lodge at one time, which is now became Apollo House, which had a lot of shenanigans around that a few years ago. Remember, there were homeless people were living in it, and you had like Brendan Owen magically appears with the keys and stuff like that. Well, that's where the Apollo Lodge was. That's where Apollo House used to be. And that was a very powerful lodge in Ireland, probably still is. And, you know, that's a lot of NASA is involved in that as well. And that's, you know, the Apollo Lodge was very powerful in the old Dublin Corporation under the British. So that's why they named that the Four Courts. These are all, you know, the King's Inn. These were all Masonic type things. And yeah, so Dublin is one of the most Masonic. It's one of the reasons it's kind of like people walk around Dublin at night and they feel scared, and they feel there's a kind of dark energy to it. And that's a lot of that has to do with the kind of Masonic energy poured into it. But it's not necessarily dark. It's almost like creating a subconscious thing. Like the Wellington Monument is the second tallest Masonic column in the world. The one in Washington D.C. is bigger. And that's the 4 quadrant of sacrifice, and that's pure masonry. As is the War Memorial Gardens in Island Bridge. If you want to see masonry, it's all there, and that's because of the Masons in the British Army. But yeah, like Dublin is one of the most Masonic cities in the world in terms of like the old buildings in it, and it has that energy for that reason. And even like after the War of Independence, and a lot of Connell Street was destroyed, you'll find lots of 20th century buildings, early 20th century buildings along O'Connell Street that still have fascia in them. So, you know, you'll find it everywhere. You can literally go on a holiday. You can go on a symbolism and holiday. You know, I could take anyone around Dublin and I say, look at this, look at that, look at that. And it's just mind blowing. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah. I suppose I wanted to maybe just move on slightly in a sense, because I suppose the reason I triggered this conversation was to do with the fact that, you know, Freemasonry is brought up in a sense by people in the Wake movement as probably, you know, like a controlled opposition kind of scenario, and I'm getting in the sense that A is probably not the case, but B, I would say that there are kind of controlled opposition elements at play in Ireland, whether they be Masons.
Absolutely, but I don't think they're Masons. They don't have to be Masons.
No.
They're people from Ogra Fine Gael and Ogra Fianna Fáil and the Greens and all the left-wing parties infiltrating the alternative scene here, pretending to be one of us for a while and then causing mayhem. You don't have to be a member of a secret brotherhood to do that. They can just get it, Ogra Sinn Féin or someone could say, like, go down to that Telegram group and cause mayhem and accuse everyone of being a Mason. There's the kind of things that go on. Well, I'll tell you one thing they do. They look for disturbed or mentally ill people. And this is the telltale sign, actually. If you have a disturbed or mentally ill individuals within, say, a Telegram group that's suddenly spouting the most appalling lies about a person in there, particularly a person that has any kind of influence and power, they've often been weaponized by an infiltrator. The infiltrator has told them all these lies and stories about them, knowing that the disturbed person, like a cannabis addict or a recovering alcoholic or someone who's psychologically not unhinged, which unfortunately the alternative scene is filled. Unfortunately, there's too many people of it drawn into it. It's just the way it is. And people with psychiatric history, and they will weaponize them. That's a telltale sign. That's a very nefarious thing. Try to find out who their buddies are and who they're connected to, and you'll often find out that there's an uncomfortable proximity there. That's where I will leave it. But having said that, in terms of shills, there really isn't any because we don't have a lot of power. I mean, let's be honest here. We're hardly, exactly. If Ireland is 100%, if we add up us all together, we're probably 3 or 4%. We'd be doing well 10% and 12, 13, then we could really, but you have to remember right now we're just nothing. So I mean there's a lot of narcissism in the scene, people saying, oh, I'm not putting my real name out there because the government will be after me and stuff like that. And they don't even know who you are, they don't care. You're nothing, So and I know I'm nothing, like I may influence people, but in terms of the grand scheme thing, you'll have those county councillors in Kerry who have more power than I'll ever have. So we have to get
certainly not worth. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And there's certainly nobody nobody afraid of us as of yet, anyway.
No, I doubt it. There. The thing is that if we cause a problem, it'll usually be towards something like that's affecting a politician personally. So we found out some kind of financial scam or some kind of thing that was damaging his or her ability to do something. That would make us a problem, and that's actually a good, like people like yourself, Louise Rosengraves, John Waters, Dave Cullen, and Ashley O'Loughlin are very good at that. It's just like highlighting that there's funny business going out there. That's enough. That's often enough. We'll never overthrow them or anything like that, but we can make their lives very uncomfortable. At the same time, we can slow them down, but also it's important that we also make our own lives good. Now, and so saying things like there's Masons everywhere and they're devil worshippers and they're pedos and all this stuff, that's only robbing you of your own energy. Now, having said that, there has been incredible wickedness by Masonry in the past, and it just reminded me of one then. The old Masonic orders in the early days were some of them were actually akin to black magic in terms of the shit they got up to, including walling up live babies inside walls. They have these foundational rights of buildings, and they used to in the city of Bremen, they found 200 babies in the city walls that had been walled up alive. It was believed that the death energy of the child gave power to the strength of the wall. It was giving the wall a kind of a personality. Now, these were very dark brotherhoods and generally not mainstream Freemasonry, but I'll tell you one thing, some of them were, and in particularly one of the rights that when they do laying a cornerstone is the right of today of putting down red wine and a layer of fat, okay, a layer of animal fat, lard. Well, that was blood and flesh at one time, and I'll give you one for you. If there's one Masonic thing in Ireland that I think has continued, I think it's the Spire in Dublin. I think the Spire in Dublin has really got my attention. That thing seems to have been almost like the opening crescendo of the destruction of the Ireland that we grew up in. And I'll tell you why. When prior to that was this Nelson's column, celebrating the famous British Admiral Nelson who won the Battle of Trafalgar. Well, in 2000 or so, when that thing was being dug up, they found, the Irish Times and everyone reported that a box with a Masonic insignia was found at the base of the foundation of the original Nelson's column. So it'd been, for the first time in 200 odd years, found. As you'll dig up, you'll find that story. So there was a box they pulled out that had this compass and square and the eye on it. Okay, the G. Sorry, the G. No one knows what the G stands for, by the way. Not even the Masons. It's been lost to history. But when I saw that, they were all Irish Times like, oh, it's going to be a time capsule. It'll be letters from dignitaries in Dublin at the time. It'll be something charming and wonderful. You know what I thought was in that? A dead baby.
Oh, all right, okay. Right.
Oh, it goes to the National Museum of Ireland, and everyone's going, what did they find in the time capsule? And the National Museum comes out and says, there was nothing inside it. And I said, you fucking liars, there was probably a dead baby in it.
That wouldn't be good.
No. And that's when you want to talk about occult and magic, you bring that stuff into it. And that spire, everything about it just sets me off the wrong way. It's
energetically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it we know from my own work in the ancient megaliths that certain stone circles and standing stones, absolutely, even been scientifically quantified, the roll-white stones in England, have an ability to capture energies from the air. Somehow it's unknown. It could be like William Reich's Orgone energy, or according to Philip S. Callahan, who was a U.S. military communications genius who was in Ireland during the World War II. He called it diamagnetic energy, but it affects the surrounding area. It's why Ireland has so many round towers. These round towers were not watchtowers. They do something to the immediate area. The grass grows differently. The animals want to graze there. They seem to have properties to them. This spike in the centre of Dublin, apart from the fact that it's just a stupid idea, like let's build something, needle, like that kind of thing, right? Apart from the fact it doesn't look good, it doesn't go with the place. It's like, I'm not saying it's true, but I wouldn't be surprised. I've a round tower behind me. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, if that thing was probably some nefarious agenda. You see, we have to understand, Jerry, that, I always refer to something called the secret unknowns, okay? And it comes from the Godfather 3 movie, where Al Pacino says, who shot the Pope? Who killed the Pope? The first Pope, who poisoned him? And he goes, the Illuminati. I don't know, the secret unknowns. And I always thought, like, well, that's it. Beyond everything we know in every country on the global level, there is, John Waters calls them the Combine. I've used the Andy Garcia's thing of the secret unknowns. There could be a super lodge or a super dark religious organization that was the ones who put the spire there, was the same lineage who put the column there and probably put a baby inside that box. And while we're pointing our finger, it's like, no matter what we do and point our fingers at, whether it's Bill Gates or anyone else, we're not pointing at the chief bottle washers. The chief bottle washers, the secret unknowns, will never know their names.
Oh, 100%. I totally agree with you. Like the Klaus Schwabs of the world are just
villains. Yeah, he's a civil servant for them. He'd be like the county councillor in terms of what their power, right? I mean, I having studied this stuff for so many years and the occult in general, I don't even know if they're human. Now, I'm not saying they're aliens or anything like that, but it's almost like, would there be a force in the universe that's having a malignant effect upon this planet that literally possessed them? Because when I worked in Goldman Sachs, there used to be 2 elevators, one for us animals who went up to the floors we worked on, and a special elevator that went you straight to the top floor that brought the Ivy League school, the Skull and Bones type stuff to the top, the big shots. And sometimes the elevator we use to be getting serviced, right? This is down on Wall Street. And so you'd be allowed to use their push elevator, all the wooden line and everything. And you know, I used to you'd end up in this guy who was going to the top floor, and you'd be getting off at like the 40th floor or something, and walking down a flight of steps. Yeah, because they didn't stop at every floor. But you'd be going up, and you'd sit in this guy, and you'd have a different energy about him. It'd be like sitting standing next to an alien or something, and he just looked like he had this kind of aloofness about him. And I remember like one time I was on like the World Series was going on. I kind of like baseball, and I just asked him, did you see the Yankees game last night? It was amazing. And he went, oh yes, like he couldn't communicate with me.
Yeah,
and it's like so it's the consciousness inside these fellas. Is it stop being human and start becoming something? I mean, I feel weird even saying this.
Well, I kind of agree with you, and from just from my own experience of the last 12 months of kind of covering different things and writing about them, I've definitely 3 or 4 times got the sense I've stepped into something that has forces I prefer not to delve too deeply into.
Welcome to my world, Jerry. I often tell people when they step over that threshold, you're going to have things that will challenge your actual belief in humanity and your belief in what this world is constructed. I could tell you things that you wouldn't believe, and I'm never going to make them public. But yeah, there is a force running this planet that, whether it's human or not, it hates humanity. It preys upon our suffering. If you look at how the world has been run today, every single globalist agenda is designed to cause as much pain, hurt, and misery as possible without actually directly killing us. So it's like an extraction of suffering cult. That's the way I'd put it. And it's like it lives off our pain, our fears, our anxieties. Like it may be some kind of predator on some cosmic level. I mean, is this what they mean when they talk about, there's some, you often hear about these stories of this kind of like this other third force that appears in like Lovecraft's novels, that it's like, yes, it's supernatural, but yes, it's also cosmic. It's reflected in the depths of the ocean and that outer space, this kind of thing. It has noticed humanity for some reason, and it can distract energy off our suffering. I know that's out there, and who knows, maybe even at some levels of mainstream are finding a way to try and deal with it. I don't know, but I do believe that there is a force on this planet. We'll just call them the secret unknowns again. And if you were to sit down and say who put the spire in the centre of Dublin, you'd have a very funny paper trail of people. It leads back to someone being literally probably pulled into a limousine somewhere in Switzerland, and a guy being pulled in with his secretary, and the guy blows the secretary's brains out, and then he goes, "You will build this spire in Central Dublin." I'm honest to God, I bet it's something like that. So if there is a supernaturalism to it, it's that dark.
Yeah, well, like it's almost like the if you look the whole era, and all the stuff that went on with the needlecraft, as you call it, era, it's almost like that the suffering is a key element to it, that it's elongated.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember like Mother Teresa, that horrible creature, and we were brought up to believe she was this wonderful woman that saved people that were poor in Calcutta. In reality, she laundered billions and billions in money. She would give people a set of rosary beads and tell them to go and die in the corner with a blanket. No health care was given or anything. She said something like, I mean, I actually consider, if there was ever a demon that walked this earth, it was probably Mother Teresa. She said something once that there's nothing more beautiful than a baby dying of AIDS as a symbol of God's pure love. Now, what God has the pure love of watching a baby dying with AIDS, other than this demonic force the secret unknown force that would possess people like her and get her to do things like this. I mean, I look at more and more of them, and not just the local, not just the big time shots in the WEF. I'm talking about the local lefties and stuff like that. And you see so many photographs and videos of them. They not only look possessed, the Antifa types, but they deteriorate rapidly. This thing is also feeding off them as well. And they don't look healthy. They don't look right. They look like gargoyles on the outside of churches, you know, waving their, you know, at their little protests and stuff like this. What the fuck is that about, you know? And it's the same look that the likes of, so you see, look at them. You look at Peter Sutherland. You look at the globalists. It's very few of them where you'd actually look at them and say, "Oh, he looks like a nice man." They all look like they're rotting away in real time, as this force that's running the planet is moving through them and using them as a kind of a tube to extract it out of humanity. But it's also deteriorating them as well. But it seems to keep them alive for a long time. And it's like,
do they, in that scenario, Thomas, do those people, like, if we take that theory and kind of theorize that it's true, do those people or do those entities, do they have any choice in the matter?
Well, it could be like, you know, the whole thing of a cosmic evil. By that, it means like there's a passive evil and there's an absolute evil. So like an absolute evil would be a serial killer or someone like that who takes sadistic pleasure from murdering someone or torturing them, right? Like that kind of thing. But then there's a passive evil, a kind of an, you know, what may be evil to us might not be in the grand schemes of the universe. For instance, like to the minnows at the bottom of a stream, you know, the kingfisher is evil because the kingfisher comes out of this other dimension, the air, comes under the water, picks up a poor minnow or stickleback and eats them. So to the stickleback, you'd say, we are looking at the kingfisher, beautiful bird. It's magnificent the way it dives into the water and pulls out its prey. Now, to us, we see a beautiful bird and the majesty of nature. But to the minnow, that's evil. That's passive. So maybe this evil is the same kind of thing. It's just doing its feeding thing upon us. Now, what's the thing to do then is to cut off its food supply. This is why things like a parallel society can be so important. The less engagement you have with them, the less you're feeding them. Like even, like for instance, like I want to talk about something, and I'm not naming names, and I'm not saying anyone's a bastard or anything like that, right? There was the pro-free speech rally in Dublin a few weeks ago. I know there was a decent turnout, and I know that 99% plus of the people that were there were wonderful people with their hearts in the right place. But going has the Masonic law.
Yeah.
Did you get that?
Yeah, I got that. Say that again. Just repeat it again, Thomas.
Yeah, it says, but going on the steps of the Masonic Lodge in Dublin and dancing with a Santa hat and this kind of thing, that undermined the cause of a very serious agenda. You know, we have to learn how to, and calling names and stuff like that. The Masons, that's on the other side of the street in Leinster House. That's where that's the belly of the beast. Okay. Secondly, we have to be very careful about who we put up on platforms and making speeches. We can't be having. We have to. The alternative in Ireland has to work on its public relations image.
Yes, I don't
you know, and there's a lot of people who are their egos want to be stood up there thinking they're a modern day Daniel O'Connor, not Daniel O'Connor, but Michael Collins or something. Yeah. It's not. The mic shouldn't be given to anybody because I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, Matty McGrath in the government today, he went after. You did the article on it. Varadkar and Martin were sniggering, right? I would have done the same because he was like something from Father Ted. I mean, he actually scored an own goal against us. What we need is somebody like they had that guy in England who rattled the globalists over the immigration thing, and he did it in a very calm, matter-of-fact way. I don't know what's wrong with our side. And people,
well, you see, I think you see my theory on that, and I'd have more sympathy. I'd have more sympathy for Matty there. In this sense, I think he needs. I think he's. If you like, if we're on mile 13 of this marathon, he's only in mile 2, and
Fair enough.
he's
Fair
coming
enough.
to he's coming to things, because I thought he could have been better prepared. The speech, the prepared
That was it.
remarks could have been a lot better. And
That was
now
it.
I have to give him the credit for going into that den of fucking thieves to stand up and get heckled and laughed at. But I think if Matty and a few of these guys have to decide if they're going to be just local TDs who always get elected, or if they're going to stand up and now start talking on bigger issues, they're going to need to start getting better advice.
Yeah, totally agree, completely, 100%. I'm not to say that the man's intentions were anyway wrong.
Yeah.
Obviously his intentions were, admirable, but he wasn't well versed enough on it to state it in that way. And of course, when you step into the belly of that beast, everything in there is against you. This is one of the reasons I say to people, I'm going to run for election. So you won't change shit. You'll never change shit on their terms. You can't win on their rules. So, like, I knew that everything would happen. Like, the camera would cut to Martin and Varadkar smirking, and it was all designed to make him look like a nut job, something for Father Ted, even though he's not. I'm just saying,
I agree with you.
Use him as a macro version of what we should be as the micro. And maybe we need to form a kind of a secret society of our own, where we develop the conventions of how we address people. We have a sort of a thing saying, like, we don't go on radio shows unless we have like a bulletproof case. We don't approach politicians and call them by their first names, which is one that I have a problem with.
Well, I've adopted that, and it was you that I heard that say. I've adopted that with with the government ministers. I've stopped using their first name because I thought it was a brilliant device. Because your point there about, because it personalizes them to a sense that they're almost like you're talking about a friend. You might be giving out about them, but they're still a kind of a friend.
Absolutely. A drinking buddy. If you address them by their second name, you see their whole demeanor change, because that's a revolutionary act in this country. But I'm still seeing people who claim to be on our side carrying banners with Leo and this crap written on it. I mean, you've got to get out of that, guys. This is a real club we can beat them with. It's just simple. Like I said, we need to get our communication things better. When we're in a formal situation where we're on it, making speeches or anything, we have to talk in very confident language and very confident, and we set the parameters of the debate, not them. So, if they're immediately going to come back with the conspiracy theory thing, you just ignore that and you continue plowing on, this kind of thing. And so, so it's like, the communications things has to be polished. Like I said, we're not, you can learn a lot from studying things like Freemasonry. You can see how they took control of things by using language and this kind of thing, and working to get their way. And instead of saying, oh, they're just all Satanists and they're all nonsense and we've got to destroy them. Well, that's not true to start with. But secondly, you think to yourself, what gave them the power? And is there any way we can actually use it for ourselves? And one of those things is to address is the use of language. They're very specific about the use of language. Language is a form of magic. It's a form of spellcraft. And how you use it and how you deal with it is very important. And a great part of this is the ability not to be led into a trap. You'll have the Jesuits, they want to talk a secret society that really knows how to do this with the Jesuits. The Jesuits have their whole Jesuitical language that to bamboozle, as Martin Luther called it, hocus pocus, that they could talk rings around someone, but it was all bullshit. But the thing was, those rings were talked around someone in such a way that it was almost like a form of verbal gaslighting. So you couldn't answer the question anyway because you didn't know what the question was. So, if you have a core belief of certain statements, such as mandatory needlecraft is wrong. Oh, sure, that's like, that makes you a granny killer. That's irrelevant to the point. Mandatory vaccinations under any civilization is wrong. We learned that from Mengele. Now, don't be comparing me to the Nazis. I'm not comparing it to the Nazis. I'm saying it's an affront to any democratic society and any concept of liberty. And then, oh, well, what about that? It's just wrong. It's been accepted by our ancestors. It's wrong. It's been in the statute books as being wrong. It's wrong. And all you have to do is continue to make that the point, and it will break them down. Because what happens is their circular logic and their logical fallacies eventually go into a spiral and they vanish into themselves. And people will only remember where, like, if you're going, oh, you're going to the poor children, you're going to put needles in the poor, you look like a fucking idiot. But if you sit there and hold analytical language without trying to look smart or clever, in a very matter-of-fact way, without being antagonistic, that will worm itself into the consciousness of a neutral observer saying, oh, I like the way that woman took on that TD. She was very sort of straight up and she didn't let her point go. Now, I'll tell you an example when that happened, and RT nearly had a panic over it. During the height of the whole scamdemic, as he coughs, the Claiborne had what they had a conspiracy theorist on about the vaccine as they were being rolled out. It was a woman from somewhere down in the country. Now, they'd obviously pre-screened this woman before she went on, and it was obvious she wasn't a nut job. This was a woman, a normal Irish lady who was very good at her argument and was going to run rings around the psychological terrorist Claiborne very easily. And so they preempted it by Claiborne going, what you're going to hear next may be very disturbing to some of you out there who've lost family members. And that was how they did it. Now, the woman stood her ground. She was brilliant. But this is how wicked they are.
Yeah. No,
never be allowed to make an argument.
No, like we should never have got off the. We should never have got away. Anytime, what I never understood about is we should never have got away from the human rights argument. The scientific argument is the one they always want to have.
We'll never win that,
and we'll never win it because none of us win it. No.
It's the same with these Freeman and the land guys. They think they can go into court with that and win that. They'll never win that. You think you're going to take on the whole law society, the King's Inn, who are drafting legislation 24 hours a day, and you're going to go in there with your Black's Law Dictionary and beat them? It's not going to happen. Just like I'm not going to ever win an argument on science, no matter how many you read of it. But if you stick with the core human rights issue, it's against human rights. And we, after the Nuremberg Declaration, you're doing is highly illegal. And then they try to go on, but the science says, I don't care what the science says.
Well, they always want to pivot, which tells you have the argument right.
Yeah. Just stick to the core point. I mean, the only way to ever defeat the whole vaccine thing was always going to be the civil rights aspect. Nothing else was going to work. And you could sit there. I got this document from, Pfizer or whatever, and it says that they're going to say, but there's another, they'll always do that. But they're going to say, I'm sorry, Jerry, but there's laws against your human rights. They're never going to say that, ever. And that's the one you badger the bastards on, those kinds of things.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right about building the parallel society. And obviously that takes work. And obviously nobody wants, a lot of people do want to do it, but a lot of the leaders I see don't want to do it because it's a lot of hard work.
It's not a lot of hard work. It's not a hard work because of baby steps. Piecemeal.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the first thing? Don't watch RTE. Don't watch mainstream news. Don't buy newspapers. Don't go on. Especially don't go on it. Ignore that. Right? Don't vote. That's the other one. Don't vote. Don't run for election. Don't think, I'm going to run. Don't bother. You will never win. You walk away. I'm an anarchist. In many ways, I'm an anarchist. I could call myself, I was ever going to call myself anarcho-capitalist. So you go into the shops. There's an automatic ticket thing, and then there's a regular checkout. You use the you use the regular checkout. You use a human. You keep that job going. Yeah, there's lots of things you can do. Support small shops if you can. Support local producers if you can. There's loads and don't be getting addicted to Netflix and Amazon. there's lots of things. It doesn't begin with some grand philosophical or political manifesto. It begins as something very, very small in your own life. Where say something like, well, there's a climate tax coming in 2024 that's going to tax all your briquettes and your coal. Well, if you've got a shed out the back, right now, take your money and fill it full of all the coal. So when this and fuel. So when this thing does come in, you'll have beaten them. You'll have beaten the tax. You'll have, little things. Think of yourself as boxing clever, and you'll be amazed how much confidence you get from these little victories, these little small victories. And that next thing you know, you meet people who are doing the same thing. They're thinking the same way, and suddenly they're able to help you in something you can't do, and they can help you in the vice versa. And even though and this is the most important one of all, cash. If we lose cash, the demonic force that runs this planet has us. And this is something we can reach an old Catholic lady in Cabra West in Dublin or down in Ballinacog in Cork, right? You can say to her, if they take away the cash, they'll make it very difficult for you to do this, that, and the other. Like, what you mean? And you say, well, you want to give your kid, your granddaughters a 20 euro note inside an envelope. You'd like to do that, don't you? Well, they'll take that away. Oh, why do you want to take the cash away? Because the bank's got complete control over your life. How would they do that? Well, if you don't do what they say or believe what they want, they'll shut down your payments. This kind of thing. The cash one is one we can win, and we should take great what's the word? Confidence in what happened with the AIB fiasco when they tried to go cashless in certain branches around the country. Who was on the forefront of that? The average Irish person, and mostly elderly. There's a reason why farmers stuff the 20 pound notes under their bed. There's a reason for that. And that's and cash. This is a whole thing. This is one of the reasons commies and lefties are like anti people having cash, because it gives them the power. The commies and lefties are only interested in one thing: the destruction of humanity by absolute control of bureaucracy. That's all. There's nothing, no other agenda there. They want complete control of humanity. Now, cash they have nightmares about it, because as long as cash exists, and remember, lefties today isn't union leaders on the front line. It's fellows who work in banks and stuff like that. And so we have to keep that going at all costs. That's as long as we still have cash. And I know people say that sounds very crude talking about money, but cash has been with us for 6,500 years.
Well, it's very easy to say it's crude, Thomas, but in a non-cash society, you and me might not be able to have this conversation, because Thomas Sheridan, well, we're turning off his broadband. We're not letting him spend his cash on broadband because he's too influential. Yeah. So it's very relevant.
Exactly. Like, so we talk about Masons, but really the nefarious thing is bureaucrats and this kind of. You look at in Cambridge in England, not Cambridge, Oxford, that they now want to put in a carbon demarcation zone where you're only allowed to drive certain parts of the city at certain times. Now, and then you'll have a chip in your car, a chip on your phone, and know where you went and everything. Now that's stage one of saying you drove to London, we're taking X amount of money from your account.
Yeah.
So this is an extremely easy argument to sell. And then someone says, they wouldn't do that. Well, they also said they wouldn't bring in a vax ID.
No.
And this is and they did it. And here's another one: the vaxxed people. So in order to eat in McDonald's or go on holidays, you put 3 experimental vaxes inside you that could have killed you. Hopefully, it didn't. I took none, and I have all the same rights as you. I'm in a parallel society of the unvaxxed. Join us for the next one. And that's how you do it, because you gain nothing from it. You gain nothing from it. We have to make people angry that they were injected. We have to make them angry that they were injected.
Well, yeah, I do. Do you get the sense that people there is a right? What's your sense of the energies at the moment, Thomas? In terms of
I think there's a citizen coming in. I mean, I have a couple of spook accounts on mainstream boards like politics.ie and board.ie, and where during the height of the scandemic, if I mentioned anything, and deliberately, that was cynical of the narrative, you'd have all these assholes all jumping all over you and calling names and everything. Well, that's all stopped. And guess what? There's a lot of likes and thumbs up coming to things. Like I saw one post that someone posted the other day, I think it was in politics.ie, and he says, let's be honest, the vax was the biggest flim-flam job going. Everyone I know who's vaxxed is sick. The unvaxxed are not sick. And it just was basically the rosary beads of our state religion, which was COVID for a while. Now, I expected that guy to get savaged. But instead, he was left alone, but lots of thumbs up. Now, that's a sea change from a year ago. And not only that, one guy tried to come in and say something like, oh, this whole thing is really just anti-vax language. And people all jumped on him and says, but the fact is, I got vaxxed and I just don't feel right. And I'm a bit worried. There's a lot of this kind of thing. And I used to think, and the people who are openly saying, are the ones who are anti-COVID, were they the nuts? Because I think it's the other way around now, the more I think about it. And they're very anti-lockdown. There's a great anger of any attempt to a lockdown of any kind. So this demonic force that controls at one time the worst elements of Freemasonry and is now controlling the bureaucratic world seems to make the same mistake over and over again, is that it rolls the dice too soon. We saw that with Trudeau and the truckers in Canada. When he seized the bank accounts, he gave Canadians a science fiction movie from the future. He gave them a view into the future. And that's what we need. We need them to make more mistakes. And they are making more mistakes. And the more mistakes they make, the better it is. Now, the way for us to approach is not to run around screaming and shouting. We just have to hold our ground and make the methodological arguments that it was wrong. And, you know, it didn't really help COVID because the people who are not vaccinated are all perfectly healthy. And that's the elephant in the room they can't deal with. And then that becomes the weapon to sharpen against that becomes like almost like the oil stone to sharpen the argument against a cashless society and everything else. Very important for us going forward to rub their mistakes in their face. And things are only going to deteriorate more with the health fallout from people who have been vaccinated. And instead of them being raging at the government, at this Pfizer or any other company or anything, we have to make sure the next generation of foot soldiers don't follow them. So therefore, anyone who posts or goes on about my mother died and it's definitely the vax, or my daughter died, don't be afraid to put pictures of Luke O'Neill inside his rubber ball or his guitar and say, yes, a so-called modern Western nation actually implemented that for this fucker here. That's Ireland. And it happened in other countries. People got vaccinated because Dolly Parton or Big Bird from Sesame Street told them to. You see, we have to make this a shameful thing for them. For the rest of her days, Claire Byrne must be known as the COVID psychological terrorist, because that's what she was. Her job was to implement psychological terrorism upon the Irish nation during her TV show while it ran on RTE. That was all that was. It was to terrorize people into the lockdowns, into the vaccinations, and so on. These people must never be allowed to get away with that, because the politicians, I can tell you something, the politicians always get away with it, okay? They always do. That's why they're in politics. That's why you have, you know, parliamentary privilege. It's basically they can do what they want and get away with it. We don't have trials for politicians in this country. We have stupid tribunals, which lawyers make an enormous amount of money from. But they couldn't do what they did without their foot soldiers. And we have to make sure the next generations of the Claire Byrnes, the next generation of the Luke O'Neills, don't get to be so cocky, because they'll go down in history for all the wrong reasons.
Well said, Thomas. Well said. Look, we might leave it at that, Thomas. I just wanted to I just wanted to tell everybody, and I'll put the links into your content in the description of this video, and I'll be writing a piece on it as well. But it's thomassheridan.substack.com. If any, and genuinely, I know I say this a lot, but genuinely you should be following Thomas. I know a lot of my subscribers are anyway. But it's thomassheridan.substack.com. He's got 3 YouTube channels: Thomas Sheridan, Thomas Sheridan 2, and Room 310 313. Tom's gonna have a link to all of them after this video. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for this conversation, Tom. It's just been hugely enlightening, and hopefully we'll see you soon, and enjoy the Christmas. I don't know if pagans celebrate Christmas or not.
Yule and Saturnalia. That'll piss off some of your Christians. All the best to you and your listeners, Jerry, and thanks again.
Yeah, not